Welcome to Pep Talk, where we discuss the state of Texas real estate market as it relates to property taxes. Here's your host, Paul Pennington.
Well, good morning, everybody. We're going to have kind of a special podcast today. We're going to talk about the regular session, the 2025 regular session as it pertains to property taxes, and then we're going to dwell a little bit into the special session for 2025 that's going on as we speak. So why don't I have each of you introduce yourself with a quick intro? Kyle, you want to introduce yourself a little bit?
Sure. I'm Kyle Mauro. I am a contract lobbyist at Hillco Partners, but I also serve as the government relations chair for the government relations committee of an association called the Texas Association of Property Tax Professionals, which many of you listening might be familiar with. So we get involved in a lot of property tax stuff up at the Capitol, working with Paul and Carl, and looking forward to joining you this morning.
Okay, thank you. And then Carl, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, Paul. My name's Carl Walker. I'm with Texas Taxpayers and Research Association, also known as TERA, however you want to pronounce our four digits. But I am the senior analyst over property taxes. So everything property tax policy related that kind of comes through the Capitol, I kind of deal with. Before, I've been with TERA now for almost 6 years, believe it or not. And before that, I was actually the property tax director at Anadarko Petroleum. So I've got quite a bit of experience in the property tax world. So I'm looking forward to it today.
Okay. So let's just start off. Let's just get looking down from 30,000 feet. Your opinion about how, or let's say the issues insofar as property taxes that you saw develop in the 25 regular session and what you saw get passed. And so we'll start with Kyle. What if you look down from 30,000 feet? What were the major issues from your point of view in the 2025 session?
Sure. Well, I guess if you start off at the beginning, there was a lot of bills filed on a lot of different subjects, but it was obvious that the legislature, they didn't really want to focus on appraisals this session, the appraisal cap stuff. They didn't really want to focus on, efforts to eliminate the property tax. So from my perspective, they really focused on the rate side. They tried to address local government spending. They tried to address non-voted debt and some things that have been kind of lingering around for a while in rates on the rate side. So I was pretty pleased with that. But of course, we also got involved in a lot of, property tax administrative issues. That was where we spent most of our time this session. I felt like, many of the things we worked on made some good progress. Some of them weren't very successful, but at least we got the conversation started. And, if you look at the end of session, I think we got a lot of good stuff done, not just in kind of ending the conversation on appraisals for now, but also addressing some fundamental issues with property tax administration, through your bill, Paul, and a couple of others that we got to focus on, as well as addressing some of the rising issues that we've seen stemming from the locally elected appraisal board members, like local appraisal caps and multi-year appraisal cycles. So I was pretty pleased with the way that the session finished up, and I think that we got to start the conversation on some more complicated stuff that we'll likely bring back next time.
Carl, what are your views on the regular session?
Well, like Kyle mentioned, on the circuit breaker appraisal cap, we were very concerned about that coming into session. But we quickly kind of realized that there really wasn't an appetite to discuss that. So we kind of saw that as kind of like, we're just not going to talk about that a whole lot and let that temporary appraisal cap hopefully expire. So nothing really. I think there's only one appraisal cap hearing on leased property. I think they got a hearing, but it didn't get out of committee. So we were happy to see that appraisal caps kind of died for the most part. But we worked a lot on property tax relief. There was the Homestead exemption that's going to be on the ballot in November, and then there's also business personal property exemption at $125,000 per location, which, we kind of, with all the homestead exemptions we've had passed over the past couple of sessions, we were a little concerned about, there being a split role where homeowners are repeatedly being taken off the roll, but business is not. And so we've got a concern about the split roll aspect of it. So we're kind of happy to see that they tried to balance it out with a little bit of a business relief to some extent on that. But, we also dove into the elected board of directors issues with the reappraisal plans, as Kyle mentioned, specifically what's kind of going on to address what happened in Tarrant County with those elected officials. So we kind of got into that. And then also, because of that, kind of piggybacking off of that is awareness of what's going on with the property value study and how that affects taxpayers and also school districts. So one bill that we worked on, it wasn't necessarily our bill, but it was Representative Martinez Fisher's bill that we supported that basically want to take a deep dive look into the property value study and its overall effects and whether it needs to be revamped or not. But we'd like to see also more look at rates on the property tax relief side. There is a bill by Senator Bencourt, I believe it's Senate Bill 1453, that redefined debt service for the debt rate INS calculation. Well, we kind of think that might be a bigger property tax relief than all the other relief bills, primarily because jurisdictions have been able to set their debt relief at whatever, not their debt relief, their debt service at whatever level they wanted. So they maintain these debt rates over time. With this minimum debt service, now as values grow on the tax roll, these values are going to come down. So we're really excited to see that. So I know I got in the weeds a little bit more than you probably wanted on a 30,000 foot, but those are some of the things we're kind of excited about.
Let's talk about in other states. There's a real move to, or have been efforts to abolish property taxes. And I know that there are some in the legislature who were focused on that in the regular session in 2025. Describe to me or give me your opinion why that doesn't get any traction with the members of the House and the Senate, the abolishment of property taxes, and then instead of having property taxes, you use some kind of use or sales tax to make up the difference. Why does that not get traction with the legislature? Go ahead, Kyle.
Well, from my perspective, as we mentioned already, there's lots of bills filed, right? Lots of bills filed every session to eliminate the property tax, and it's easy to do that. Obviously, these elected officials hear about property taxes all the time from their voters, and they feel like they want to do something about it. And so they can go home and tell them, listen, I filed the bill, but it didn't go anywhere. So what's more important to me is, what is leadership thinking? If they're being realistic, they have to make, real decisions that are going to impact the state budget and that are going to impact people. So they have to look at this stuff a little more logically and think it through, maybe a little more than a legislator who's just going to file a bill does. And not to say that those people don't, firmly believe that we should eliminate the property tax. I'm sure there's plenty that do. But, from my perspective, when you look at it, and you hear this analogy made all the time, but you want to have as many legs on the stool as you can when you're talking about revenue. The state has obviously, oil and gas taxes. They have sales tax, which is a big one, and they have property taxes that go to fund a lot of essential services. If you eliminate the property tax and you try to shift all that into some kind of a consumption tax, whether that's increased sales tax or a VAT tax or whatever it is you want to call it, when you're focused so heavily on consumption, that really jeopardizes the state budget and all the essential services they have to provide in maybe times that aren't as, when the economy is not flourishing as much as it has been recently. We've all seen recessions and depressions, and we all know what can happen to state budgets. And we've seen other states who focus on consumption taxes and they end up with huge deficits. And then you have to make budget cuts. You end up cutting public ed, you end up cutting healthcare and, different services that people have come to rely on that are kind of essential functions of government. And so I think that's the real caution. Obviously, when the economy tanks, maybe property values go down and rates go up a little bit, but there's mechanisms that you can use to kind of rely more on a different leg of the stool versus being so focused on consumption. And I think that, people like TapTap and people like Tara have been, and of course people like you, Paul, have been beating that drum for a long time. And I think the legislature realizes that they don't want to go to just, a single leg stool.
Well, I'll tell you, there's a lot of talk about what's going on in Florida. And you'll read articles that DeSantis is gone to the legislature and says he wants to abolish taxes. But when you dig down, the proposal I think they're looking at is like having a $500,000 exemption on homes, even talk about $1 million exemption on homes. So essentially what they're saying at this point in time is like, we're just going to remove, for all intents and purposes, the property tax burden from homeowners, right? But I haven't figured out how they're going to make up the difference when you essentially take, you have three different types of taxpayers who pay taxes in the state. Those that own business personal property, machinery, equipment, inventory. Then you have people that own commercial real estate and residential real estate. Homesteaded single family homesteads. When you take them out of the equation, to me, it just shifts the burden to the commercial and those who own a lot of equipment and inventory and stuff. But anyway,
well,
Carl,
Paul, can let me add something to that, because really, just kind of piggybacking on the elimination, it's simple math. Whenever you look at the total state general revenue for 26-27, it's $176 billion.
Is that the number if you eliminate all property taxes? Let's just say we did it. You're saying it would cost the state of Texas $170 billion over 2 years or 1 year?
Well, the total general state revenue that the state brings in now is 176 billion over the biennium. Is what they're thinking. Now, the 2024 property tax level was roughly 87 billion in 2024. So you take that over the 2 years to get them lined up, you're talking 174 billion. So the property tax is the exact same size as all of the state general revenue. So if you're going to want to go to a state sales tax, you're going to talk about going from 8.25% to over 20% sales tax.
Right. And those, I think I sent both of you a video of I don't recall his name, but I think he's the representative from Ellis County, is kind of a property tax abolishment hawk. And he in the interview I sent you, he kind of backed off the total abolishment, and his way to really reduce property taxes was just reduce all spending by 15%, all spending, and it's like, does that work? But I think the point that's missed with everybody who wants to abolish property taxes is, let's just say on one day we abolish property taxes and we have to increase sales, use all these different other taxes to come up with $86 billion or $87 billion a year. So let's just do it. To me, the economic hit is severe, because if you're in any kind of a business, are you going to do business in Texas where a sales tax is 20%, or are you going to go across the border where it's 6%? I mean, I don't think it's been thought through, but there is this mantra that is spoken that it's time that single family homeowners stop renting their property from the government. And that's the mantra they use, that you don't really own it, you rent it from the government. So anyway,
Paul, let's go back real quick to your Florida example, where they're talking about eliminating property taxes just for homesteads.
Yeah.
Well, think about the INS side. Whenever a school district goes out for a bond election for, like, let's say a brand new stadium, and homeowners are paying no taxes.
Right.
There is no reason for them not to vote for that new stadium for their kids to be playing in, because they're not paying taxes on it. So who picks up the burden? Business will pick up all the burden, and debt will shoot up like a rocket ship.
Let's go to another topic. In this past session, members of the House wanted to increase an exemption on business personal property. They wanted to say, if your assessment for business personal property was $250,000, that anything from that amount down should be exempt from taxation. We went through the whole process, and the end result was business personal property with and I'm sure there's interpretations. My interpretation is if the assessment is 125,000 or less, you're exempt, which begs the question to Carl, does that mean the first $125,000 of any business personal property assessment is exempt? I'll let you answer that. But from the House's perspective, this session, that was, in my mind, that was their focus, that they wanted to get a big exemption for business personal property. And if I'm just thinking out loud that maybe they came up with the number 250,000 because that would be an exemption to small businesses. And so that's why they pushed it. At the end of the day, it's 125,000. Give me just both of you, just give me your general overviews of that exemption.
Yeah, that exemption was all meant to address the whole split roll aspect of giving homeowners exemptions over the past two sessions.
Right.
And trying to give something towards business, because over 90% of business property is currently on the tax roll, whereas it's a much different lower percentage for homeowners. But the 125,000, as it ultimately got passed, was 125,000 exemption by location for every taxing unit. So it's a by location exemption, and trying to figure out.
To your point, I have a $1 million assessment at my location at this address. So to your point, you're saying then I'm only going to be assessed at 875,000.
Yes.
In the future. Okay, go ahead.
Yes. So it's by location. So if you've got a taxing unit that has, if you're within a single taxing unit and you've got 4 distinct locations, each one of those locations will get $125,000 exemption as it sits right now. But it has to be passed on the November ballot, and the voters have to approve it. So we're still waiting to get over that hurdle.
November ballot. If the voters approve it, so it would be retroactive for tax year 25?
No, it'll start in 2026.
Okay. Do you have any comments about that, Kyle?
Yeah, I mean, generally, like you said, the Senate has focused on homeowners, on homesteads, and increasing the homestead exemption, and that's really been, their primary, motivation for providing property tax relief. But we had heard a lot from the House last session about wanting to do something for businesses, and that's why they included them in the circuit breaker.
Right.
Our standard talking point is that if you just compress the rates, then you're going to help everybody, uniformly.
Right.
And that's the ideal way to provide property tax relief when you have some money to spend. But I think the House really wanted to do something, that was strictly business focused. And in addition to that, while I think compression is the right way to do it, you do ultimately end up in a situation where you've got a big chunk of the budget that's being used to compress school rates, and you may not always be able to compress those rates, right? Like you have to appropriate that money every session to make sure that the rates stay down. So it puts you in a little bit of a tenuous position too. But I think that it's great. It's good tax relief for businesses. They as we have seen. Providing exemptions for homeowners shifts the burden over to businesses. So I think it's fair to provide some benefit to businesses. I think, from my perspective, it's important to make sure that there's clarity in the law and that it's implemented uniformly across all taxing jurisdictions, so that people like you, Paul, who go to bat for business owners, kind of know what they're going to get in every different appraisal district. I'm not sure that it's quite there yet, or that anything's being done to try and address that. But I guess we'll have to see whenever that exemption comes into play.
Okay. Let's now talk about the Senate, and their focus is, in my view, has been compression of the school tax rate and increasing homestead exemptions each year. Why don't one of you discuss and it'll be on the ballot in November, the homestead exemption increase that voters will be voting on.
Carl, you want to take it?
Carl?
Well, it's one of those where the homestead exemption, let's see, it's going up to $140,000.
Right.
This year, they've increased it several times and kind of lose track sometimes. And then over 65 actually goes up to $200,000. Now, this is for school districts only. So all your other taxing units are not necessarily going to be getting the exemption or be giving the exemption out. One thing that we have seen in the past, even with compression and homestead exemptions, is that whenever the legislature does give one of these, the reaction by the other jurisdictions to somewhat backfill on the total property tax bill. So we've got numbers on what happened with compression and then the homestead exemption from 2023, where they provided over $5 billion of property tax relief just within the schools. However, after the cities and counties kind of got done kind of backfilling because they were seeing tax bills in total come down, you only netted about $600 million of total relief across the state. So whenever you're looking at these homestead exemptions, you got to look at your relief in a bucket of just school districts, but you also need to then go and see what these other jurisdictions and make sure they stay in check and they're not eating up all of the property tax relief provided and paid for by the state.
I would make it, and you might be able to back me up on this. If you have a homestead exemption of $200,000 for seniors, and it's school district only, there's a bunch of seniors who are exempt.
There are.
I mean, a ton. Because what's the average? Do you know off the top of your head what's the average assessment on a homestead in Texas?
I'm trying to remember. We had some data just off the top of my head on the number of school districts that I think I've got the data in front of me. Let me take a look. I don't have it right in front of me, but I think it's, in the 40% range, 40 to 50% of school districts have average home values under 140.
So you can start going back to the people who want to abolish property taxes and say there's a chunk of Texas taxpayers, at least on the school, which the school tax rate in some counties it's just a county and a school rate.
Mm-hmm.
So you're getting pretty close to abolishing property taxes for some of these taxpayers. Let's talk about the issue with the board of directors. In 2023, part of the property tax reform package that came out of 23 was a circuit breaker for properties with a value of $5 million or less, had a circuit breaker that their assessment can't go up over 20%. Then another component was compression. They compressed the school tax rate. And they also adjusted the homestead exemption, but then they allowed, now help me out with this, it's counties with a population over 75,000, is that correct?
I think that's right.
I think that's the right population number.
It may be higher, but you're on the right track.
So in those counties, 3 of the board of directors would be elected by the general public. And so we did that and people were elected. And then we got to a situation, I think, in Tarrant County and Johnson County, where they just said, well, we don't want to revalue. We just don't want to revalue property. Or they started making up rules.
Well, specifically what Tarrant did was they went to appraisals every 2 years. Then they were going to freeze values from 24 to 25. And then they instituted their own appraisal cap at 5% rather than 10%. And they were allowed to go over 5% provided they had clear and convincing evidence, is exactly what they did.
Right. So now we're in the 25 session, and there was legislation that was drawn up that would and was backed by elected officials, which said a board of directors cannot just summarily make up laws. We have something called the Texas Property Tax Code, and you just can't do it. And so I'm going to let Kyle talk to this. It got a bunch of pushback by a lot of people who said, we think it's good that the board of directors can just summarily make up rules for their county and just essentially make up law, right?
Yeah.
And so it was very difficult to get this reform package or bill through the House that would have said, no, you have to follow the property tax code. Why don't you give us a little background on that?
Yeah, sure. Well, one thing that we TapTap as an organization has always cautioned against is politicizing the appraisal process. There have always been bills to require elected board of directors members, elected chief appraisers, elected ARB chairs, all these types of things that functionally politicize that appraisal process. And of course, if you're going to run for that office, what are you going to say? I'm going to bring down your property taxes, right? But that's not really the function of the appraisal side of the tax equation. That's the function of the city government, county government, school board, right? They're the ones who set the rates, and there are countless mechanisms for people to engage and to try to address their property taxes in the way that they should, whether it's by speaking about the budget or about the tax rates, or just going to the ballot and electing new elected officials, new leaders in your local area. And so we've always cautioned against politicizing the appraisal process, and that's exactly what was done 2 regular sessions ago, whenever they created these elected BOD members in larger counties. And so we've already kind of talked about what happened. And so during the session, there were lots of people going to the legislature and saying, we got to fix this, right? It's just untenable to have local appraisal caps, to have multi-year appraisal cycles, and it causes lots of problems with school finance. It causes problems with equal and uniform taxation, and lots of different things. And it's better if we have a system that kind of operates the same from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. And so there were several lawmakers, including a couple of different chairs, who filed legislation to try and address this. This was something that even the appraisal districts came to the legislature and said, we need you to fix this. So they asked for it to be fixed. There was lots of pushback from well, I should say there was strong pushback from a small number of members who had issues with this. But what they ended up doing was, or had issues with the fix. What they ended up doing was amending a bill on third reading on kind of the last day to pass bills to get this thing through, because they really cared about it. And then, of course, it had to be voted on. It had to go back over to the Senate and be approved. And so, a lot of people say, well, it was done, kind of, undercover or in a real sneaky way. The process exists. They use the process. It was done in accordance with the process, and it was kind of approved on both sides and ultimately allowed to become law by the governor. And so, what the fix says is very simple. It says you can't do anything as a board of directors that would prevent the chief appraiser from being able to appraise property as is required of him by law. And so, from my perspective, that prevents multi-year appraisal cycles, and it also prevents local appraisal caps, because that's the job of the legislature to implement those, and not of boards of directors. They're really intended to hire and fire chief appraisers and to pass an appraisal plan that allows the chief appraiser to do his job.
Right, and approve budgets and
Exactly. More administrative functions of the appraisal district.
Yeah, and kind of piggybacking off of that as well, there was another bill that was passed that beefed up the board of director training, and also included a long acknowledgement of duties that they had to sign prior to actually running for office. One thing that we did whenever the elections first started was we called all of these populous counties that had elections to kind of try to figure out who's running, who's not, and the backgrounds. And a lot of these didn't even have elections, because once the candidates were told you can't cut property taxes through this position, they just chose not to run. Now, others kind of went ahead and did that, as we saw, and ran on platforms of, we're going to cut property taxes.
Let's jump to 2025. Do we all agree that insofar as property taxes are concerned, the only property tax issue that's going to be addressed in the 25 special session is telling the counties and cities, you by law you could raise your rates up to whatever it was, 3.49999 without calling for a popular referendum. And now the focus is we want to lower that to 2.5. So you can raise it by 2.4999 without an election. I mean, that's basically the big property tax push for the special session 2025. Do we all agree on that?
Yeah, that's the bill, but there is a population element of it, and lowering from 3.5 to 2.5 is only for those cities and counties with a population of over 75,000 now.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, it seems like that is going to be kind of the primary push. Obviously, as everybody has seen in the headlines, we're a few members short of a quorum on the House side, but presuming that they will eventually achieve that quorum and continue to work on property tax stuff, it seems like the House and the Senate have both agreed that that's the best way to create additional property tax relief above and beyond what they already have done in the regular session. And so hopefully that's what they continue on the path
Let's
of.
jump back to the regular session in 2025. We haven't spoken about compression. Carl, correct me if I'm wrong. Compression that was achieved in this session is going to lower the school rate by 6 cents. Is that right?
Yes, 6 cents, and the compression that's in there, and is really the compression that's set in there that's already from what I like to call the natural compression, but they still have to fund the natural compression that as values grow, these rates compress down.
Right.
So
Okay.
there wasn't any additional compression like they normally have done in the past.
Let's close on a subject which is dear to me. And there is talk in the special session that they want to pass a law to prohibit jurisdictions from using taxpayer money to hire lobbyists. And y'all correct me if I'm wrong. At the end of the day, do you see that getting any traction? Will there be any kind of a bill that will restrict jurisdictions from using taxpayer money to hire lobbyists? Or will, at the end of the day, will they refine it and it'll be they'll cut out and say you can use lobbyists like you need to do a new tollway or you need to do DART and stuff like that, but for other categories you cannot use a taxpayer funded lobbyist.
Well, we've seen all different kinds of variations of that idea. I think a lot of it stems from frustration, that lawmakers have when they try to file a bill that might, impact a city, particularly around property taxes, and then they see that city spending taxpayer dollars to fight those laws. And that's their perception, and I don't doubt that there is serious frustration about it. However, we have seen, some jurisdictions come to the table and say, well, we don't really understand how state government works. We're experts in local government, so we need an expert to help us. Or, I'm from El Paso, and as an elected official, I can't just send my staff to Austin for 140 days and I can't be there because I've got another job. I'm a part-time city council member for whatever reason. And so, always a big push on the Senate side to do that. But then when it gets over to the House, it always mutates in some form or fashion. It always ends up changing to, okay, well, we're not going to limit it completely. We're not going to completely eliminate it, but we'll change it to where they can't fight, property tax reductions, or they can't work on those issues specifically, or, we're not going to limit contract lobbyists, but we are going to limit them from using their associations to be taxpayer funded and to lobby different things. And so, it's hard for me to say, right? The Senate is hot and heavy on this, and they've already moved it. The House is always a little bit slower on the uptake. I think that part of this quorum break is probably going to play into the potential for that bill to get legs and move. Obviously, if the Democrats do come back, or when they do come back, there's going to be a very condensed time frame with which they have to pass, a lot of things, and so they're going to tier those things on a level of importance. And maybe taxpayer-funded lobbying doesn't get there, but it's not an issue that's going to go away. So if it doesn't happen in this special session, we'll absolutely see it again in 2027.
Carl, your thoughts?
I will defer to Kyle on that. That's not necessarily an issue that Tara dives into the middle of.
Okay. I will tell you this, that and in particularly, I've had to deal with lobbyists that are hired by the appraisal districts before, but particularly in 2025, it was a beating. And to move legislation and to be forced into to make changes to bills and so on and so forth. And I always thought, from my perspective, I always thought it was unfair because from the perspective of CFAR, we have to recruit members to join, and they have to put up money to pay for a lobbyist and for us to come up. If we have an idea for a bill, we have to pay for a lobbyist, which isn't cheap, and that's how we do it. With the Texas Association of Property Tax Professionals, they do it the same way. They have to raise a lot of money. They raise PAC money for contributions. We do the same thing. And I always thought it was unfair for the CADs to use taxpayer money to fight me when I'm trying to pass legislation which is pro-taxpayer. Or they fight Kyle and he's trying to pass legislation which is pro-taxpayer. Or they fight Carl, or they fight whoever. I just thought it was unfair. So I'm real interested to see if something gets legs. And let me be perfectly transparent. If the appraisal districts within an association, they have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of members. If they raise money within the association, it's their own money, and they hire whoever they hire, that's fair. My problem is when they're getting money from taxpayers that goes through the appraisal district, and part of that money goes to hire lobbyists to fight people who are trying to do pro-taxpayer stuff. I think it's unfair. Now, to take the CAD side, they're going to say, well, we're using that money to hire a lobbyist to prevent people from writing bad policy law. Now, that's their perspective. But I've always had an issue with that.
Well, you make a compelling argument, Paul.
Huh?
You make a compelling argument, especially when it's related to, trying to pass bills to either reduce the property tax burden, in a fair way, or to make the administration of the property tax system more easy for everyday people to access and to be able to try and fight their high appraisals.
I'll give you an example. This is a real example. We had a bill that got passed in the 21 session. 21 session, yes. And it was pretty comprehensive. And when we were having our final hearing before Ways and Means in the House, a very prominent chief appraiser, we were both told, hey, it's going to pass, so don't go on, just make a brief statement. So I made a brief statement, and this prominent chief appraiser stood up and he said, we've reviewed it, it's been vetted, and we feel like this is a good bill for Texas taxpayers. And so it went on and it passed. That very next session, they filed a bill that gutted it, to gut it. And I'm going like, what happened in 2 years that it was a good bill for Texas? Now every single component of it needs to be gutted. And I just think that's inherently unfair that they use taxpayer dollars to do things like that. One last thing. The appraisal districts wanted to hire teachers during the summer to sit on the ARBs. It was vetoed by the governor in 2023. It was vetoed by the governor in 2025. Just real quickly, did they come back and ask for it again in the next session?
It's a member-driven organization. I know that there are big appraisal districts who have trouble filling their boards, their ARBs. And so I guess if enough of them are continuing to have trouble, it might. From my perspective, the appraisal districts had a pretty successful session. And generally, when my clients have really successful sessions, we tell them next time, maybe don't ask for a whole lot. You only have so much political capital. So we'll have to see. But it wouldn't surprise me if they don't have a lot else to work on.
Okay. Let me ask you this quickly. In the next session, do you see a fix for the Texas landfill case? Do you see any kind of a fix making it through to the finish line to correct that? Or is that a fix that has to happen through the court system, that another case has to work its way up through the Supreme Court, and that's how you fix it?
That could certainly happen first. Obviously, we have to wait a little while until the next legislative session, but I think that bill got good momentum. I think it to some degree was eventually agreed upon by the appraisal districts, at least some of them. I think that we're going to have success with it next time. We got a lot of runway ahead of us to maybe work with those guys and try to hammer out some language that makes sense. Obviously, there's statute that we're essentially trying to clarify. There may be a difference of opinion in what that statute means and how it should be implemented. But that's an easy taxpayer protection bill that the legislature needs to pass to make sure that people have a fair shake and they can use the statute to ensure that their appraisals are accurate.
Okay. Carl, you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I think there's some common ground to be had there, to where I think you could get something across the finish line. I think it was close last session.
Okay. All right. Well, gentlemen, I really appreciate you taking the time to participate in this podcast today. There's a lot of legislative knowledge with you two. So, when I do a podcast, I only invite smart people. So.
Well, that's quite a compliment.
Well, now I'm questioning why you invited me, Paul.
I'll take the compliment.
Thank you very much. We enjoyed it.
Hey, it was fun, Paul. We'll do it again soon.
Okay.
Thanks, Paul.